We're going to jump right into this morning. So over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about listing specific activities. As we know, this is something we need to focus on immensely in this market, even though our offices are clearly outperforming the market in listings taken units, listings taken volume, sold listings. It's something that we need to improve our skill set on. So last week, we talked about the process of communication and problem solving and how those apply to our listing consultations. And today we're going to talk about we're going to further that discussion, talking about some communication strategies and specifically closing techniques. Now, this is something I think that is really an obstacle for a lot of agents, as a lot of agents are natural salespeople. They're very good at articulating why they're good. They're good at making a connection with their potential clients. All those things, but then as they get towards the end of the meeting or get towards the end of the presentation, they kind of get that deer in the headlights look, and they just stare at their client, expecting their client to be like, oh my gosh, where do I sign? Let's just get the paperwork out and get it done right now. And sometimes we'll even just let the meeting go with the anticipation of, oh, they'll follow up with me when they're ready. And we never have a clear closing technique or a clear closing question or a clear call to action in our meetings. So as you guys know, one of the big things that I really focus on is making sure that for every meeting, every conversation, we have a preset objective. Any listing consultation you go into, your preset objective should always be to walk out of there with paperwork signed, unless you learn something new in that meeting that would make you not want to take that listing. But for the most part, every listing consultation, you should go into it with the anticipation of, I am going to get paperwork signed. Now, part of that is some prep work of anticipating what the normal objections would be. Now, one of the biggest ones is, oh, well, I need to talk it over with my husband or wife, and they strategically only have one of them in the meeting so they can use that excuse. So just make sure that before you meet with them is find out who are the decision makers, make sure they're both in the room. To apply these techniques. So let's, I'm going to share a screen with you here. Hold on one second. And talk a little bit about some strategies here that I think are really important, the things that have helped me in my career. Number one is learning the language of sales, mirror and match. Now, this is something I think a lot of us have heard of before. But I wanted to touch on it for a minute because this is something that really worked against me for the first several years of my career. It's funny that a lot of people, a word they use to describe me is intense. And I tend to be a little intense and bring a lot of energy to the table, and I think it freaks some people out. There's a small percentage of the population that really leans into it and likes it. But for the most part, my intensity can freak some people out if they don't already know me. So something I had to teach myself to do was really slow down, because I'd go into any meeting and really just press on it and be really fast paced and try to get to the point. I didn't like the no nonsense piece of the conversations. And I noticed that I was turning a lot of people off until I learned the mirror and match concept, which was really matching and mirroring the client. So having a better understanding of what is the pacing of the client, what are their filler words, how do they process information, what are the questions they're asking, how do they respond to the questions. And the quickest way I was able to do this is lean on pacing. So I'd really, after the first question or whatever it was, I'd really listen to what was the pacing of their conversation, and I'd slow down and match their pace. I'd also match the level of language that they would use. So if, for example, if they were very educated and were using a lot of bigger words and talking statistics and theories, I would lean into that and come right back out of them with bigger words and that side of it. If they were less educated, I would, for a lack of a better term, I'd dumb down the way I would make my presentation. Is I would use simpler terms, ask better questions, listen to them, let them really process through the information before they could articulate back a response. So mirror and matching, I think, is a critical piece of it. We talked a little bit about rapport last time, that it is our job to really accelerate and establish rapport, not let rapport be established naturally, but we should press that. And then we need to lean on it. So really, after that connection's been made, really lean on that connection. And then a really good way to do that is find those connectivity points. What are the points we have in common? And this is something I find really interesting, is no matter how different you are from your clients, no matter how different your walks of life, there are always points of connectivity, common interests, common vacation spots, common familial status, whatever it is there's always some points of connectivity there. The key is to find them quickly, identify them together, expose them, and then lean on those connectivity points, because once they see that you are them, then everything you say has a little bit more validity for them. The other piece of this that we talked about, how critical it is to identify their needs through the needs analysis and tie both a positive and a negative emotion to those needs, and really getting some clarity on their motivation. So this is the magic combination here, is if you can mirror and match, already have rapport built with them, find those connectivity points, done a great job with your needs analysis where you really identified what the underlying needs are, tied a negative and positive emotion to it, got clarity on their motivation. Now you've put yourself in a power position that any future conversation, no matter how difficult or fierce that conversation may be, you have an arsenal of weapons to help them through that problem and get them to a solution quicker. So the next piece of this is using tie downs and presuppositions. One of the greatest classes I've ever taken is called The Language of Sales. And it's not necessarily a fun class to take because there's a ton of homework, because it's trying to break down the patterns of how you build sentences and how you deliver information. But as you go through the process of this homework, you start naturally restructuring the way you communicate to get your initiative across the table and make your preset objective a reality. And a couple of the strategies there are tie downs and presuppositions. It's funny when whenever I teach this class or talk about tie downs with people and presuppositions, I kind of give away my secret sauce, because they start identifying how I use these in my conversations with the people. So don't bring this up and use it against me, and know that I'm using tie downs. The key with any of these sales strategies is that you have to come from a place of contribution. You have to have sincerity in what you're trying to get done, and know it's really to help the client get their initiative across the table, and not for your own gain, because that comes across as snaky and bad. But tie downs. So I use a lot of tie downs when I'm talking, even in a group setting, but even more particularly when I'm in a one-on-one presentation and going for a close. Is I really believe it's all about getting the person or the client in a pattern of saying yes. The more times they say yes to you throughout a conversation, the easier it is for them to give you the big yes, which is signing the paperwork. So tie downs are exactly for that, is to create a pattern of yes. And here's several examples of tie downs. Now, the key here is you don't have to memorize all of these, but the key is to learn several of these so you're not overusing one of them, and which ones really sound like you. So here's a whole list of potential tie downs. Does that make sense? Isn't that what you want? Won't that be great? Does that work for you? Okay. Don't you think? Isn't that true? Yes. Is that okay? Notice all these are little questions that create an easy yes. So even throughout the process, even before I start giving a value proposition, I'll ask questions like, or make statements followed up with a tie down like this. Particularly if I know the move is a hard thing or something for them, it's easy for me to say, hey, I know that this conversation may be difficult for you because what you've expressed to me is you're not excited to move right now, right? Yes. So you have to nod yes to this, right? And then if I do everything I can to make this process as easy as possible for you, Would that be good for you? Yes, right? So I'm looking for all these little yeses along the way. So the ones that I use all the time is I say right all the time, right? Don't you agree? So just we'll go through this list and pick the things that you feel like really sound like you, and just get in the habit of using a lot of tie downs throughout the process, because all you're doing is trying to get some kind of affirmation back from them that, number one, they're tracking with you, and number two is you're creating that pattern of yes, and you're helping solidify all of the pieces of the puzzle that they need in place before they feel comfortable giving you the big yes, which is signing the paperwork. So through the process of identifying what are the number one things that they, as you untrack or uncover those underlying needs for them, that's where you can use a lot of tie downs. So for example, if initially they say, I want to make the most money I possibly can, you on the sell, you dig a little bit deeper, you go through the tactics that we've already taught you of going 3 deep, asking more questions, and you actually identify that they're actually going through a divorce and getting rid of the house in a certain amount of time is more important than whatever it is. Then you can start using some tie downs to start getting some real positive yes and moving forward before you even ask for the paperwork to be signed, with questions like, so basically what I'm hearing you say is it's really important for you guys to have this transaction go smoothly without a lot of disagreement between the two of you and being done by the end of June, right? Right. Now, if we were able to do that and facilitate that and make that a really easy process for you, it'd probably take a lot of pain out of the divorce for both of you. Is that correct? Awesome. Okay, so I'm using a lot of little tie downs like that throughout the process where I'm eliminating pain by them agreeing with me through that whole process. So get in the habit of using tie downs. If you don't already do this, what I would suggest is that you identify 1 or 2 of these today that really are in line with who you are and how you communicate, and then make a commitment that you're going to use a certain number of tie downs today in your conversations. Now, this doesn't only apply when you are in a listing consultation or presentation. I use these with my kids. I use these with my friends. I use these in any type of conversation that I'm trying to create a pattern of yes. So make a goal of how many times you're going to use a tie down today and just mark them down as you're using them. And the key here is not to commit to doing a certain number of them every single day, but identifying when they should be used and noticing when you're using them. And as you cognizantly make an effort to use them, they'll become an automatic pattern, part of your language and in your pattern. But I really love tie downs. Let's jump into presuppositions. Presupposition, you just sound smart if you know how to say the word presupposition, right? So the definition of the adverb presupposition is presuppositions assume something is already true. The verb defines the action or state of being. The adverb qualifies the verb. So again, with the same thing with these, is here's several examples of presuppositions, and generally you're putting these at the beginning of a sentence. Luckily, obviously, remarkably, easily, happily, frankly, fortunately, definitely, simply, certainly, naturally, undoubtedly, surely, supposedly, quickly are examples of presuppositions. A lot of these that I look at these and I would be like, supposedly, or some of these I would very rarely, if ever, use. And I want to get really good at using the ones that I would use on a regular basis. So I use luckily, obviously, all the time. Certainly I use all of the time. Surely I use all of the time. So the way with the presupposition works is it almost is really in alignment with the assumptive close, because all you're doing is making a statement that by placing a presupposition in front of that statement, it almost makes it a truth for them, and it makes it easy for them to nod and agree. So for example here, you could just have gone through the whole process of a needs analysis, identified their needs in a listing presentation, and then you could say, well, now we've identified the most important things to you through the process of selling your home is to make sure that we make the transition or the sell as smooth as possible, make sure our communication is on point. And then I use some kind of tie down. Wouldn't you agree? And they say yes. And then I'm going to go right into a presupposition. Well, luckily, I'm here today to talk through exactly how I can make that happen in the least amount of pain possible for you. So I went right from a tie down and a soft yes into a presupposition with a statement of validity and truth. So they've tied that to, I basically asked, wouldn't that be good for you, right? They say yes. Then I use a presupposition to say, luckily, I'm here, right? And so now they've tied those two things together. Yes, that would be good for me, and luckily the solution is here to help me do that. So now they've made the connections. I've given them the dots to say, I've got a problem. Marcus has the solution. He is the solution to my problem. So these are really great things to use as well throughout the process. So I would just get in the habit again, same thing, is to look at these and identify which ones are the ones that you would use on a regular basis or that you feel comfortable using. And then if you have a heart, so I would say two things. Number one, if it's easy for you to identify how you would use these in sentences, just make yourself a goal of saying, okay, today I'm going to track 15 or 10 presuppositions. And I'm going to make a note every time I make one. If you look at these and be like, man, I don't even know how I'd work these into my sentences or into my listing consultations, what I would do is identify 3 of them and write 10 sentences using 3 of them each. So that's 30 sentences that you think you could use in a listing presentation or listing consultation using presuppositions. And so as you write them down, all you're doing is tracking in your mind how these go together. But again, I know this feels like a little bit like English class, but this is a skill set market. The better you can get at identifying tie downs, getting the pattern of yes, you're going to be much stronger going in for your close. Same thing with the presuppositions. Coupled with the tie downs is you got a pattern of yes going. Presuppositions make a statement of truth, and they make that connection, connect the dots, and by the time you're ready to actually go for the close, it is a very easy close. Let's talk about objections real quickly. It's generally speaking, I believe that if your clients do not articulate any objections, they're hiding an objection from you. So I really want to make sure that I really identify what and if any objections they have by asking great questions. And this is a pattern that I use every time an objection comes up. Is number one is I'm always going to repeat back their objective to make sure I clearly understand and I've clearly identified the objective. And what I'm doing is I'm isolating that objective down to saying, is there anything else around those? Because a lot of times they'll group all of their objections into one big objection when it's really a series of several objections. So I'll repeat back to them their objective. I'm going to approve or acknowledge, because the last thing they want to feel, the minute you tell them that their objection is not valid, they go back into defense mode, and you've ruined the rapport that you've built with them. So you have to approve or acknowledge whatever they've said as their objection, no matter how absurd some of those objections are. And sometimes I know a lot of us that have been in business for a while, some of the objections we get are absurd. We have to validate them and say, hey, I can understand how you feel. And then I'm either going to address it, or sometimes all I have to do is acknowledge it and move. Sometimes I don't even have to necessarily fix the problem. So again, the example here would be to repeat it. So if their objection is, I've got, I'm worried, I love everything you're saying, but I'm concerned because my aunt has a real estate license. So I'm going to repeat that back to them, say, okay, I think I understand. So that's generally how I move into the repeat. Hey, I think I understand. What you're trying to say is you're concerned about moving forward with me, even though, and I'm going to use some closing techniques in here, even though internally right now you feel like it's the best decision for you and your family to sign with me and move forward, you're worried about the repercussions of hurting some feelings with your aunt who also has a real estate license, right? Tie down? Yes. Okay. I can understand. So now I'm going to approve or acknowledge. I can understand how that could feel for you and your family. Okay, so now I've just said, I acknowledge how you're feeling right now. I'm giving you validation for how you're feeling. So now we're on the same team. Like we have a connection. I'm not against you. And then I'm going to go back, like in this one, I'd absolutely take care of the objection and not just move, but I'd go into it and I'd lean back on the motivation to say, hey, let's go back a few minutes ago. The thing you told me that was most important for you and your family was this, this, and this. Now you've already identified that I can take care of those problems for you and help you address each one of those issues. And right now, the only thing standing in our way is some feelings between you and your aunt who you don't feel like could have the same outcome that I can have for you. Is that correct? Awesome. And then I'm going to make a suggestion on how we can move forward and still make her aunt feel better about the transition. If it's an objection that I don't think really we need to get into and really acknowledge, I'll just repeat it and acknowledge it. Say, hey, I can understand how this could make you nervous, and there are always some feelings around it. And then I'll go right into my next sales pitch, like we're moving forward. Like I acknowledged it, I repeated it, I acknowledged it, and we've moved. Okay, so you have to determine, are they objections worth the conversation of getting handled, or are they just objections that they're kind of throwing out there, but they have nothing to do with the process moving forward, and we don't need to spend our time talking about them and go around them. I know I've already talked about the feel, felt, found technique, which I use a lot in objections. Anytime an objection comes up, I can understand how you feel. Hey, actually last week I was meeting with a client of mine named Johnson's. They felt the exact same way. And as they moved forward with our services, they found that boom, 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 boom. Okay. So we use the feel, felt, found a lot with objections. Okay, let's talk real quick about the actual close, because a lot of using the tie downs, the presuppositions, handling objections, all that is setting you up for the close. Now, again, this is something I feel like so many of us fight the close, and we go through all the hard work of building the rapport, giving the information, crushing the appointment, and then we sit and stare at them, and then when they don't want to sign, we part ways thinking, okay, they'll call me this afternoon ready to sign. Your highest probability of getting paperwork signed and getting your preset objective done is in that moment that you're in the room. If you don't capitalize on it, then your chances of closing that actually decrease significantly the minute you walk out the door, and they're not going to call you. What they're going to do is they're going to call other people to validate what you had said to them, who are then going to go into their sales pitch and increasingly decrease, if that makes sense, your chance of getting that close. So let's talk through a couple closing techniques real quick. The Columbo. So this is also, a lot of people refer to this one as the doorknob technique. And so this is a great closing technique, particularly for someone that has got a lot of objections and that person is really hell-bent on not signing with you that day. They use the Columbo. So basically, after you go through the preset or go through all their objections, you handle all of those, you talk through it, and you can tell they're still just not ready to sign. I go back into agreement with them of saying, hey, that's perfectly fine. What I want you to do is think on this information. And then I get up, start gathering my things like I'm going to go. And as we're walking down the hall or before we stand up to go, I'll do actually one more thing before we go, or before we end our talk today. I come back to one more thing that I find is really like the punch home, the home run hit of like, hey, don't forget about this. Okay. And that's the reason they call it the Columbo is if any of you have ever watched the old show Columbo, that was kind of his famous move at the very end of every TV show. Columbo was a TV show. At the end of the show, he looked like he'd about to start to lose the case until all of a sudden he was like, oh, just one more thing. And then he'd really ask a question or bring up a point that really brought it home. So the Columbo is a way for me to have them really put their defenses down because they think they won, they think the conversation's over, and then I can come back and be, hey, just one more thing. Boom, 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 right? Whether it's, hey, just one more thing. We came prepared to go to work today, and generally speaking, we can generate the buyer within the first 48 hours of putting the home on the market. And we actually came prepared today to knock all the doors. We'd really like to get that done. Are you sure you're not ready to move forward? Right? So something like that would be the Columbo. The assumptive close is probably my favorite close in most instances because I don't like to feel like a hard salesman. I'm perfectly prepared to be a hard salesman if I need to be, but I really like the assumptive close, and I use this a lot throughout the process. And generally, if I do a great job with the assumptive close, going for the signature on paperwork is super easy. They're ready to go. So the assumptive close is using statements like this throughout the process, where I'll say, the first thing we're going to do as we get this process started, or the first thing we're going to do right after you sign paperwork today is, okay? So I'm watching their body language as I say things like that, that if they're leaning into the conversation like, oh, awesome, he's going to do this right after we sign paperwork today. If I say that several times throughout the process of, hey, as you become one of our clients, you actually join our tribe too, and you get a lot of other things that go along with it. There's a lot of little assumptive closes like that it's just, I'm acting in my mind as if it's already done. And now it's harder for them to tell me it's not done than for them to sign the paperwork, okay? So we use a lot of assumptive closes throughout the process. Takeaway close is actually, everyone wants to feel like they're getting a great deal. And the takeaway close is not only do they want to feel like they're getting a good deal, they also never want to feel like they lost out on a good deal. So we use the takeaway close. In fact, this is the number one way we've combated agents that are willing to reduce their commissions, because we're not willing to reduce our commissions. So one of the things that we've done is we've created an administrative fee of $495. But it's something that we can actually just take away and reduce for them to feel like they're getting a great deal on it. So for example, the takeaway close is if we're going through the process and they're like, this person down the street said they do it for 5%. We go through the process of helping them understand that if we were willing to reduce our commissions, we'd also have to be willing to reduce the level of services we provide. We're not willing to do that. However, one of the things that we're willing to do today, if you're ready to move forward today, is we'd actually reduce or cover the $495 administrative fee, but only if you're willing to move forward today. So it's a takeaway that if they don't do it now, they're going to miss out on that savings. So that's an example of a takeaway close. The hard close, this is one that most people have fear around. But realistically, if you do a great job with your tie downs and presuppositions, the hard close is very easy and very direct. Nothing kills confidence in you if you've done a great job of really articulating your value, really showing them how powerful of an agent you are. And then if you hem and haw around the ask of like, well, I guess now what I'd like to ask you to do is sign the paperwork. It's just as a really weak ask, and that kills all the confidence that you've built over the previous 30 minutes with them. So the hard close is it's got to sound more of like a soft command of how you're asking them to move forward. So an example of the hard close would be going through the process and saying, and now all we need to do is sign the paperwork. So you slide it across with the emphasis on sign the paperwork. That is the command, and it's just like, boom, sign the paperwork. And then you sit and be quiet and watch their body language and how they react to it. And generally speaking, is they'll lean right into the paperwork and sign if you've done a great job with the presentation. So hard close doesn't mean be like demanding, be like lock them in a room. It's just very clearly move forward with the command of now it's time to sign the paperwork. Okay. A leading close also is a great way to lead into the hard close. Is you go for you've already done a great job of creating a pattern of yes, and now you ask two questions that have obvious yeses behind them, and then you go to the final close yes. So a great example of this would be something like, I'm kind of shooting from the hip as you can tell today on my examples, but a great example of this today would be like, awesome, I'm glad we're in agreement upon what is most important through this transaction. And what you've told me is what's most important for you is to net the most money, right? In the least amount of time, correct? So obvious yes, obvious yes. Then the last thing to do to move forward for us to make this happen is sign the paperwork, and we're going to immediately go to work for you today. So here you are, sign the paperwork. And then it's an obvious yes, final close, yes, okay? So I've got pattern, yes, little nods through the whole thing. Very direct question, yes, very direct question, yes. Now I go in for the close of the command, sign the paperwork, okay? The key to remember here is when people say no, that does not mean no. I know that sounds horrible because some people say that no means yes, and no does not mean yes either. All no means is you didn't do a good enough job of uncovering their motivations and providing solutions for them. So when I go for a close, so a great example of this is if I say, all that's left is to sign the paperwork, and I slide the paperwork across the table, and their body language is they lean back away from it. What I'll do is I'll retract the paperwork. I'm going to pull it back and mirror and match their reaction of like, whoa, you don't want to sign? I don't want to sign either. And then I'm going to go back to circle all the way back to the needs analysis. So I'm going to jump the whole closing, pull way out of the whole closing technique, back into the needs analysis, retouch on the needs analysis, uncover what else I need to, and then go back through the process to the close. If they're not ready to close again, back to the needs analysis, okay? I'm gonna go through that process as many times as I need to until they're ready to move forward. So the big takeaways from today is think about the language of sales. What is the pattern of your sentences? To be honest with you, a lot of times people that are not naturally good salesmen can learn this technique easier because they know it's a skill they have to increase. Naturally good salespeople that have learned just to kind of connect with people, and it's become natural for them where they've kind of winged it through their whole world and succeeded at winging it. It can tend to be a little bit harder for them to break the pattern and actually build some structure and be purposeful about their language of sales. But it is critical for you to break this down and become better at it, no matter what you're selling, whether it's you or leadership or whatever it is. We need to get better at the skill set. And then just learn to lean into the close. Do not go through the whole effort of identifying somebody that needs help and then be too fearful to ask for the business, because we have to have confidence in what we have to offer, that we have value, and we got to lean into that close and ask for business. So hopefully today was helpful. Thank you guys for being on. Any questions for me before we wrap this up? Awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate you being on. Make it a great week, and appreciate all you guys do. Take care.